Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the importance of the assistive technology assessment in supporting employees with disabilities in the enterprise. My name is Harris Rosenzweig. I'm the Director of Accessibility.
Hi, and I'm Jeff Ermold. I'm the Director of Training for iYellow Access for part of the iYellow group.
And we are lucky enough to have our president, Matt Belcher, who is our chat moderator today. Jeff and I will be taking us through the various discussions on this topic. A little bit of background on iYellow Access. We've been around since 1982, and some of you may know us from our original name of TCS or TCS Access or TCS Associates. Recently, we became part of a group of companies led by Jessica iYellow called the iYellow Group, which is comprised of iYellow Interpreting, which is a sign language interpreting company, iYellow Captions, which does captioning and transcription services, and iYellow Access, which is our company. And we're all dedicated to the advancement of equal access for persons with disabilities, whether it's in the enterprise, in an education setting, or one-on-one in the home. We're proud to be hosting this very important webinar, one of my favorite topics, AT assessments. This webinar is part of a series we're putting on regarding accessibility and accommodation. Some of our webinars are very technically oriented, whether it's on the accessibility of the Microsoft Office suite, the Google suite, PDF documents, web accessibility, whether it's on the desktop or a mobile device. Some are on general accessibility issues for the disability community, like one we did on the accessibility of voting for persons who are blind. Others, like the one we're doing today, center on accessibility in the enterprise, whether in the public or the private sector. So we do want to hear from you, though, regarding what topics you might find interesting, and stay tuned as we build out our webinar portfolio. A little bit of housekeeping. If you want to put your questions in the chat box, by the way, the hotkey for that is Alt-H. You can unmute or mute yourself with Alt-A, or you can just hold the space bar while you're talking. We'll be checking questions as you go, and Matt will be kind of informing us. We are recording the webinar, and we can provide a direction to that where that webinar is sitting in our private YouTube channel. And we also have PowerPoint slides for you as well. Information on where to get that will be at the end. A little bit of the backstory on the webinar series. So where did this come from? Really out of our deep experience working with industry in the public sector for over many decades, with many thousands of persons with disabilities. And what we call our MyAT, My Assistive Technology program, which provides on-demand assistive technology services to enterprises on an as-needed or ongoing basis. And through this MyAT program, we're supporting entities around the very thorny topic of accommodation and all that it entails. What I like to call the last mile of accessibility, where there's a specific individual who has a need for some type of accommodation in a specific work context. The other way we support organizations is assisting them in implementing best practices around some of the regulations around disability legislation. And given the vast variety of accommodation issues and needs in the enterprise, we decided that we would break this down into several webinars. I'm going to turn it over to Jeff now to review our presentation goals.
Okay, so here's kind of the main sort of subtopics we'll be covering. Why the AT assessment is a critical part of equal access for everyone in the organization. Why AT assessments are really the cornerstone of the reasonable accommodation process. The role of the AT assessment and where it fits within the reasonable accommodations process in the organization. And we'll kind of run through some examples, some types of AT assessments, just a couple, to give you a flavor of some of the issues that we encounter. You know, and again, we've been doing this a long time, and we are called in. We'll kind of walk through best practices, best case scenarios, and then a couple examples of when things don't quite go well, or we don't have all the information and parties involved. So to kind of help you navigate and hopefully eliminate some of those pitfalls. And then we're going to cover just a real broad overview of the skill sets. Obviously, all these topics could sort of have their own webinar, but we'll just do a high level overview of the skill sets that an AT specialist typically needs to do a full AT assessment. So the previous webinar, we discussed some key areas kind of covering the whole organization. So the whole support process, and the AT assessments are part of that whole holistic process, basically, of that inclusive culture in your organization. So you really want to have a clear process for the employee to request an accommodation. And the AT assessment is part of that process. A lot of times, sometimes if somebody actually knows what they use, they know what they've been using for a long time, that meets their needs, they can go on. A lot of organizations have have reasonable accommodations wizards, or a form that can be filled out, and you can request exact hardware, software, or training, depending on what you need. But often is overlooked is that AT assessment is really part of the reasonable accommodations process. And if there's uncertainty there, it's really best practice to do a full assessment before ordering any equipment or scheduling any training. So kind of the AT assessment itself, what is the process? What does that cover? It's a good idea to have that clearly and thoroughly documented. And then is there a clear process around implementing those recommendations? So if the AT assessment comes up with recommendations for training, if it comes up with recommendations for procuring hardware or software, whatever it might be, that there's a clear process for actually delivering those pieces, what order they're delivered, and if they're done in a timely, logical process. You have to coordinate the implementation also with other stakeholders in the organization. So your IT department, management, perhaps human resources, a lot of different folks we found will touch the assessment process and the implementation of the assessment recommendations. And then providing the AT training. Who will be conducting that training? What is the scheduling? The obviously best case scenario is to schedule training quickly after implementation of the recommendations from the assessment, and to do it with the right resource and so forth. So we'll kind of touch on that. And then post-training support. A lot of times people think that the accommodation is quote closed when the equipment has been delivered and the training is complete, but it's an ongoing process, and that's part of that whole culture of accessibility and inclusivity. You really want to have mechanisms in place for ongoing support, whether it be help desk, if you have internal resources for employees with disabilities, help desk support services, or if you might want to outsource those things. We have some clients that do that, some agencies that do that with us, and we have ongoing support for those folks because everything is changing constantly. Applications are being updated, assistive technology is changing all the time, so you need a support mechanism for all of those changes. So kind of drilling down the culture of equal access, we should kind of just talk about that a little bit more.
This is a webinar.
It's really all about context. So there are different types of contexts around AT assessments. Some of them are more temporary. A disability might be more temporary, where somebody just needs an accommodation for a short period of time. That would be something that's an injury, a temporary kind of a situation, or a temporary illness. So maybe somebody fell and they broke their arm and they need a different way. They're not able to use their mouse, or they're not able to type with, say, one arm or one hand. That's a temporary situation in terms of an injury, and that will heal, but they're still going to need an accommodation for that time period to get the information into the computer another way. So possibly it might be, say, dictation, voice recognition, and then, of course, we'll need that software. They'll need definitely extensive training on that, even though it's a temporary injury. The other thing is, could be something more charged. There could be some dynamics that something has been going on. We often see these situations where maybe somebody has requested an accommodation and their disability maybe is not as visible. It's not an obvious physical disability, and maybe they haven't received a lot of positive feedback, say, from their direct supervisor. So, these kinds of situations come in, so that more of an inclusive culture and more that management across the agency is trained in that, encouraging people to take advantage of these services, take advantage of the assessment, take advantage of the regional accommodations process, and not make it onerous, or, not make the person feel like they have to hide it or be ashamed of asking for the accommodations that they need. A common scenario that we've run into is someone that might have diabetes, and they have gradual vision loss over time. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's actually more severe, and it can come in the middle of life, in the middle of a career. So that's very dramatic. We see those cases quite a bit. And it might be a gradual process. They might require, say, some magnification tools for a while, and then they might need to transition to full screen reading. So that's quite a change as you're trying to learn these assistive technologies, incorporate these new tools, and you're still trying to be productive with your job. So, there could be falls, there could be all sorts of different things. Someone could fall and hit their head, maybe have some short-term memory issues and need some software to assist with that. A new hire is a really interesting scenario. If you hire somebody with a disability, and there's a lot of interest in really broadening the workforce these days for all, which is obviously a great goal for society, but our organization's really set up, and I'll have Harris speak to that a little bit more, but really, are they set up for someone who walks through the door with a disability? You want to make this an inclusive environment, but you really, it's a kind of a catch-22 because you haven't accommodated somebody with a disability before. So it really depends on how much you've built a culture of equal access. And more knowledge you have about disabilities, more knowledge you have about assistive technology and reasonable accommodations, that's really important. It's really important to have that buy-in, like we discussed in our previous seminar, all the way to the top of the organization and across the organization. Accommodation, it's a very sensitive topic. And more often than not, employees really stress over acknowledging that they've lost some functionality. And they're concerned, our culture is very focused on productivity. And so people kind of push through injuries and pain, and they don't want to disclose, but being more transparent is always best. And Harris, you want to kind of cover the new hire situation?
Yes. Yeah, that was a really good summary, Jeff, of all of the different types of contexts that can occur. And it also reminds me, of how problematic it can be just to have a checklist approach to certain things. We have to really try our best to have a nuanced approach to accommodation and to all of these different contexts. And it often takes, a lot of professional skill to understand how to handle each of those different situations Jeff laid out. Along the lines of this building a culture of equal access, one thing I've always wondered about when a new employee first starts a job, and I've been harping on this. I wish someone would take it up, some corporation or enterprise. When a new person starts, they have to take all kinds of training, online training, usually from document security, how to shelter in place, maybe various computer-related subjects, but there's never anything about disability, assistive technology, accommodation. You just never see it. Maybe something that shows me, some common things I can do in my Windows program to enlarge my mouse pointer. might benefit everyone, or things for people with low vision specifically, or any disability. I just thought that wouldn't that be a wonderful way to introduce this topic of accommodation before it becomes perhaps problematic. But enough soapbox, and back to our assessments. I'll turn it back to Jeff.
Yeah, you get Harris going on that. He can go for a long time. We're very passionate about that.
Yes.
We have that conversation quite a bit. So let's kind of walk through just the definitions of an AT assessment. Kind of what are the goals of it? It's really the process of determining of what strategies, technologies, and training are necessary to enable an employee requesting an accommodation to perform the essential functions of their job at the level expected. So when do you do an AT assessment? Well, basically when any change occurs. So it could be that new hire scenario that Harris outlined. It could be the onset of a disability in the middle of a career, like we mentioned with the vision loss through diabetes or those sorts of things, or could be an injury, new job tasks, or a change in the role. Often that's overlooked. When the job functions change, of course, the technology often changes. You're going to be using different applications, different screens to navigate every day. And again, that's not so much of an issue if you're not using assistive technology. There's still always a learning curve, though, and you add that learning curve on top of the AT learning curve, because you might need to now learn how to navigate those new programs with the assistive technology, or maybe it's even new technology. So any change in roles should really be fully assessed again. A change in technology. So if the organization upgrades the operating system, maybe Microsoft Office or proprietary applications, which is just ongoing, it's constant nowadays. And an update might be pushed down, let's say, and an employee might come in on a Monday morning and the form that they filled out 1,000 times all of a sudden is laid out differently. And maybe it's a little bit different, challenging to navigate, say with a screen reader or maybe with Dragon, or maybe it's something is broken and it's a little bit incompatible with the AT for a time. So that's all information that, again, users, they want to be functional, they want to be working on their job. So it's really, this is the role for the AT specialist to assess any of these, anytime situations change. Kind of the best way to illustrate some of these skill sets is kind of walk through some of these examples. So in the case of a vision example, let's say there's an employee that has a condition that's where their vision is progressively deteriorating, and the employee, is aware of it, is if it's affecting their ability to perform their tasks as efficiently. The supervisor is aware of it. Let's say, hopefully that this is a very transparent relationship and they've discussed it, and everybody's on board that an assessment is definitely the next step. So if we were referred this assessment, it's really a team approach. So what we would want to do is find out all the parties that need to be involved with this in the organization. So it would obviously be the employee, it would be the employee's immediate supervisor, preferably a subject matter expert, an SME who knows all the processes. And why this is important is because often people learn pieces of a job based on the functions, the takeaway functions that they're supposed to complete, the deliverables, so to speak, but they may not know the ins and outs of that application. They just know that they go to this screen, they fill out this, they press this button, or they click on various things, and they can complete the task. So the subject matter expert often is really critical, especially if the software changes, the applications, that their proprietary applications change, or there's new screens, new functions, new things to navigate. They really understand the whole layout of the program, and often that's really helpful that they work with our AT specialists because they know the productivity application and we know the assistive technology application, and it works really well that way. IT is obviously a critical part. We want to coordinate, so they're in the loop. They know that everything is compatible with their systems. Some organizations have to approve, especially certain federal agencies, approve new software. So they might want to, it might need to go through that process. And they want to be in the loop, obviously, because you want timely installation. And for someone to really be on call, somebody to be available, particularly if training is involved at the beginning of that training, it's great to have an IT person available in case there are some compatibility issues in the beginning. And then procurement, who's going to procure the equipment and get it delivered to the employee, especially now because you might be delivering that equipment to an office, or you might be actually delivering all the equipment to a home environment. You might even need a Section 508 coordinator, just depending on how the accessibility team is structured in the organization. And during the assessment, so we'll here are the kinds of things we're going to do. We're going to do a full job task analysis. So we want to sit down with the supervisor, the employee, and go through what are the production levels, what things are being affected right now because of the disability, what things could be improved with the introduction of assistive technology and training. You want to review any medical documentation if it's relevant. How has the disability affected their ability to do the core job functions, those essential tasks? And depending on the situation, we look for what could be done, like Harris mentioned, in the operating system. There might be some things, there's more and more built right into the operating system. So for some basic screen magnification, let's say, basic dictation of an email, or even basic screen reading skills, that might be sufficient. Depends on just the level of accommodation that the person needs. And then if not, we obviously look at third party, assistive technology that's designed for various disability needs. And we're going to try it. We have to even sometimes get approval. What is the process for trying equipment, demonstrating equipment in the environment, especially in large secure corporations or federal agencies? We don't have administrative rights, say, in a federal agency. So, we're going to need assistance from, again, the IT group on those sorts of things. And as we do the assessment, we get a sense of the job task. The assessment is typically a few hours. It's very comprehensive. We go through all the problem areas. We watch them perform those tasks. Ideally, the assessment should be done on site or with a video capability where we can actually observe the employee doing the tasks. And sometimes, again, the subject matter expert can be brought in during this phase as we do some sort of trial and error of accommodations. We may even need to do accessibility testing if we run into issues where it seems like the assistive technology software is having some issues connecting with the mainstream IT. We may need to do some actual testing and report any inaccessible findings. We kind of get a sense of the learning curve of the person too, and this is very individual. We get a sense of this is always an estimate. We kind of try to estimate the total number of training hours that might be needed. It's often a moving target. We try to anticipate a significant amount of training, so that will cover all of these areas that we've covered in the assessment, so that we're not kind of doing 8 hours of training here and then we come back 3 months later and do another 8 hours and then 6 months later another. That's really not the best way to support the employee. You really want to do a pretty robust implementation of the accommodation, so you can kind of step back gradually and say, okay, they've got it, they're doing their functions now with this new AT involved. Sometimes we don't get the information that we need, and that tends to be, we get little information, sometimes we get wrong information. We get presuppositions, believe it or not. In 2022, we have run into scenarios where we have folks in the organization, even management, that just don't have experience, don't have exposure to people with disabilities and might have some preconceived notions and even prejudices about what a person with a disability can accomplish on the work site. So, we need to kind of work through that and do a little bit of education. And Harris, you want to kind of cover the second vision example here?
Sure, sure. That was a great laying out of all the steps in the AT assessment process. And when we have the luxury of being able to kind of go through every step, and as you can see, it can be quite involved to do it properly. The example I'm about to bring is one in which we had an employee who was blind, who was referred to us. This was during the beginning of the pandemic, or maybe a couple months in. And just to say, we've been going out in person throughout this entire pandemic and trying to figure this out, because you can only do so much remotely when working with disability and accommodation. So in this example, there was a woman who had lost a lot of vision. She was working for a federal agency. Her employer, without doing any kind of assessment, just decided, okay, well, for people with any kind of vision program, we'll get out my checklist here. Okay, we're going to ship her laptop, of course, with two 27-inch monitors. We're going to send her a copy of the JAWS screen reader, a copy of the Zoom text screen magnification program, and a scanner pen. I guess that was part of their checklist for people with any kind of vision issues. So we were hired specifically to go to her home, install all of the equipment, and train her so that she could do her job with Zoom text and JAWS. But what we quickly found when we got there was someone who was functionally blind, someone who needed magnification so high that she couldn't really be productive using the Zoom text application. And she really needed to learn how to use the computer primarily with the speech output, the JAWS program, using keystroke commands instead of the mouse. We also quickly found that she was not a touch typist. And if you're not familiar with this type of technology, you might wonder, well, why is that a big deal? Well, when she had her vision, she could hunt and peck, use that term where she would use two-finger typist, and she would look at the keyboard to find out where to put her finger and type. But now the only way she could use a keyboard was to learn how to touch type without looking and listening to the JAWS voice. So this was a real tragedy on so many levels, because it took months of time for her to get all of this gear in the first place. And had the briefest of assistive technology assessments been done, she would have been immediately given an accessible typing program that worked with JAWS to learn touch typing over these several months. The two large monitors would not have been necessary, and we wouldn't have recommended that scanning pen at all. And during the pandemic, she could have learned to touch type and been given remote instruction on the use of her JAWS with her core applications. So this was just such a tragic example of a very simple assessment had been done in the beginning, would have completely altered all the equipment. Imagine the time and effort that went in by some procurement person, all the back and forth emails between the supervisor and the procurement person to get all that equipment, to get it all shipped down, the coordination with IT, and then to have it pretty much all kind of completely change once we got down there. So I'm going to turn it back to Jeff and kind of try to wrap up, all the different skill sets that is really required to really handle the complexity of the AT assessment.
Sure. Yeah, there's quite a few skills that are involved in really doing this thoroughly. You first need an understanding of disability, at least from a high level medical and functional perspective, and ergonomic perspective as well. Ergonomics, we didn't really touch on that as much because we're focusing more on the technology, but that is a part of the can be a part of the assessment process as well. So it's somebody that has all of that background. It's also the ability to perform that detailed job analysis. and document those areas where the employee is experiencing the challenges the most. So what processes, again, whether it be typing or mousing or speaking or those sorts of things, but even kind of that process of walking through the actual processes. Okay, what tasks are you completing on a weekly basis? Where what things are working well as is, and what things need some accommodations to be back up to par. An understanding basically of the array of IT, AT, and non-technology solutions, even like I said, things like ergonomics, larger monitors, different keyboard layouts, different positioning of monitors, mounting different desks, sit-stand desks. I mean, ergonomic chairs. It goes on and on and on. So you want somebody that has sort of a creative mindset, has had exposure to all these different areas, and make sure they're using all the tools in their toolkit when they're doing that assessment. This also really comes into play with job restructuring, or like I said, any disability that's onset during the career. The ability to work with the IT personnel and basically demonstrate various solutions to the employee to determine the optimal solution. So, sometimes that's a little bit of trial and error. And IT needs to be involved, obviously, if we're going to try even a demonstration of a piece of software. We're going to need IT involved, or they're going to need to know how to install the software, have a little bit of a basis of how it works. So that's very important. And it's important that the AT specialist can speak the language so that they have credibility. They understand some basic networking, some basic IT concepts, security parameters, those kinds of things, so that they can speak intelligently with the IT staff and let them know, okay, this is a problem area that we're going to need access. We're going to need administrative rights. We're going to need to install an extension for Outlook, say, or Word, whatever it might be. There's a lot of little things, a lot of customization. Once the actual AT is deployed, there's still a lot of customization. A lot of times, because of the secure environments, we need the IT folks involved with that so we can make those changes to optimize the system. The ability to assess the accessibility of a particular solution and its overall effectiveness, considering the employee's performance metrics. So, is this really meeting the needs? Let's go back to it. As we've implemented the accommodations, we've provided the training. Has it been effective? Has productivity increased? Have they been able to complete those core tasks to satisfaction of themselves and to their management? So not just sort of leaving it up to the employee to make the best of it. An AT specialist needs to be able to recommend sufficient training hours. So often our AT specialists have a background in training, or they even do some training as well, because that's really the best way to get a realistic assessment. It's really from working with a large cross-section of users over a long period of time, you start to get a sense of people's learning styles and sort of the learning curve that they might experience in various scenarios. They want to be able to communicate effectively. That's really critical. They want to be able to communicate the results of the assessment to all the key stakeholders across the organization. So how does this process change depending on the type of disability? You might think that that's quite a different type of assessment based on each disability and each accommodation, but really it doesn't really change much at all. The process remains the same. Basically, the person who does the assessment needs to be able to possess all these skills, all that knowledge of how to work with a wide range of specific disabilities. And if it's somebody who maybe, say, has a focus in one particular AT area, and they've done, they're going down the road of the assessment, they need to bring in other experts possibly. Maybe there's a real expert in Dragon say that they need to bring in and say, hey, can we write some custom commands once this is implemented for these screens, that kind of thing, where someone who's a real screen reader or Braille, maybe they're a Braille user. Well, a lot of folks that teach JAWS or know JAWS may not know it from the Braille perspective. So there's just kind of some examples, either having all that knowledge internally or bringing in additional support for the AT specialist to make sure nothing was overlooked. And the process itself, though, is exactly the same as dependent. It really isn't dependent on the disability or even the assistive technology that's recommended. That's kind of the basic range of very high level skill set that an AT specialist would need to do a thorough assessment. And I think that kind of covers our main topic areas here.
Yes.
Are there any questions? Please feel free to put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself all day. All day, is that right? I think it's all day.
Yeah, and while people are maybe thinking of their questions, Harris again here. I brought up a slide on our MyAT service, and I hope you're getting a sense of the level of complexity that can be involved when someone just raises their hand and said, I have a need for an accommodation. There's this whole process that's involved. We're watching the same webinars that you are. We're seeing the webinars come across our inboxes as well, the ones that are out there. And quite honestly, I have a little bit of a concern that today, what almost seems to be happening is that if you feel like your website is accessible and your PDFs are accessible, that your organization is accessible, well, that just is scratching the surface. We wanted to make sure that you knew there's a lot more going on. When you actually have a person with a disability show up at your doorstep, or someone, a valued member of your team, perhaps should acquire a disability, there's just a lot that needs to go on beyond your website being accessible and your PDFs being accessible. We do teach those topics. We have all day classes on how to do those things. Those things are very important, but they don't encompass a lot of what you need to have within your organization. And our MyAT service is just something that you can take advantage of, some of these slides, and we can send you this whole presentation and how you can maybe access some of our services to help you with some of your accommodation needs. So yeah, we'll open it up to the floor. I'll give it over to Matt.
Okay, thanks, Harris. We have a question here from Lionel. He has a couple questions. I'll read them because they may be somewhat related. First one is, how do you assure privacy? And the second one is related but different. How do you enable a process that supports employees who are afraid of revealing a disability, perhaps even not admitting it to themselves?
Excellent question. So privacy and people who are afraid to disclose. Jeff, do you want me to jump in, or do you want to?
They kind of go hand in hand. Yeah. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think it all goes back to that having, and this is obviously beyond the scope of even our topic today, but it kind of falls into some of the things we talked about up front and in our previous webinar, just that culture of inclusivity. And, that is something that the reasonable accommodations process really needs to be fully realized in terms of all the different tools. So assessment is, again, just one of those tools. There's training, there's support, there possibly is help desk, there's 508, there's accessibility, there's testing, there's, that all these things that we covered. And really it's about the organization creating that climate that encourages people to reach out. Federal government has done this very well in a lot of ways, has been a bit of a leader because of some initiatives that have come down over the last number of years. And that approach, and a lot of corporations are now taking that, is really, it has to come from the top and it has to be promoted across the whole organization. there. So there can be some education programs on it, really even mandatory training on what, how to best provide an inclusive workforce, and encouraging people to reach out, use the RA wizard, use the tools that are out there. Because in the end, and I think that to get the buy-in, even for those who might be resistant, in the organization, the ultimate bottom line is productivity. The bottom line is equal productivity for the employee with a disability to perform those core job functions. So that's the incentive for everybody. As far as the employee, again, I think the more open the culture is, the more comfortable they might feel. Those things are somewhat personal, and they're even beyond an organization. That's still something that's even more of a societal issue, I think, that we're starting to address. So it's beyond even the scope of an organization or the RA process in terms of how does our society see disability? How visible are people with disabilities? We're just starting to really, if you think about it, all the legislation that's been passed to encourage these kinds of behaviors and have really just been over the past couple of decades. So we're really just, a couple of generations into this, and we have made progress, but there's still a lot more education needed. I'm thinking particularly in the area of mental health. Mental health is somehow, I think, in a lot of places not seen as the same as physical health, as maybe not as critical or not as it's a little more hidden. People are a little bit more uncomfortable still, maybe disclosing some information, some struggles that they might be having. And I think the more we sort of open up as a society, look at all health just on a large spectrum, doesn't matter what the quote disability is, it's just all on a large spectrum. As you go through life, you might have temporary or you might have permanent changes. And so I think it's a combination of the organization doing as much as it can to have a really robust RA program, but then outside of that, as a society, we're still in an education process as well. So we need to kind of keep going down that path.
I think those are great points, Jeff. Just to add, like I was saying in the beginning, my soapbox about disability, when it comes up, it's just so often in a negative context. It's like a bomb dropping, instead of like us being inundated as we are on all kinds of sensitivity training to not only disability but gender orientation. If it were more a part of our everyday, then it might not be quite as charged. You mentioned the privacy. It's an incredibly sensitive thing to reveal that you might need help in a particular area, and that there's a huge trust factor. I would hope that there might be with a supervisor, which sometimes isn't always there. So there's a barrier there. But if there is that trust, that is the closest person who's monitoring your work. And that person is often the best person to understand maybe what kind of accommodation they might need. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, guys, for that explanation. Now we have another question. This is from Elizabeth. It says, how do you balance the desire to have the compatible equipment and software ready to go for a new employee with the need for specialized solutions for each employee? In other words, what can we proactively anticipate so our new employee doesn't have to wait for us to acquire a test hardware or software needed for them to get the job started in their new job quickly?
Jeff, mind if I jump in?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so for many years I was the manager of accommodations for a large federal organization, and we did a lot of work on being proactive. So depending on the size of your organization and your ability to get these things, there are certain categories of assistive technology that are beneficial to have a copy of, one copy of, maybe that your IT owns, that has already sitting and can be deployed and perhaps is being tested or done testing on. For example, Dragon Naturally Speaking, probably the most popular for people with mobility challenges. The JAWS program, the Zoom text program, these are common for persons with low vision, and there are others for neurodiversity or other challenges. If you can have maybe one copy, and then you're already familiar with some of the installation issues associated with installing these in an enterprise, which are different from installing it on maybe your home system where you have no barriers. So there are categories, and we'd be happy to maybe talk to you offline, and processes that you can employ if you have an IT department as you do upgrades on how best to deploy those so that you are ready for a person who may have that disability, who may need that technology when they show up.
Thanks,
I think
Harris.
that's a great idea, just to have those. There are some organizations we've had that have, they have the resources to actually have an AT lab where people can come and, try hardware, software, sit in a number of ergonomic chairs. That's the ideal, obviously, to have a little lab, a little demo center. So, but if not, at least I agree, just having one of the major types of software available is really handy.
Okay, thank you guys. Another question, Lionel says, have you found any IT-based or IT type tools helpful in the assessment process?
Jeff, any off the top of your head that you would?
Can you repeat that again, Matt?
Of course.
Repeat the question.
Absolutely. It says, have you found any IT-based or IT type tools helpful in the assessment process?
I am not aware of any quote IT type of tools. So yeah, can you think of anything from some of our contracts, Harris, maybe Department of Ed?
No, it's possible that someone maybe from a university program has put together some kind of either checklist type thing that may have been turned into a piece of software, like, like with a branch, like person with low vision, have you considered these things? I haven't seen anything like that in a long time, but it's not to say that it's not out there. A skilled assistive technology specialist could step you through all of that, because you'd have to kind of know what to do with the information it was giving you, like try this or try that. But you might not know, well, what does that mean? Once I get this piece of software, how do I know it's working, or how do I compare it with something else? And is this current information I'm getting from this tool, given how fast technology changes? So I'd be a little leery of some sort of IT type tool. Maybe we are going to move to an artificial intelligence type of platform where it can go through all of the options, but I don't know of any.
There are some pretty robust portals and wizards that some of our, our clients use, and they can be handy if someone has some sense of what they already need. They can kind of walk through screen by screen, answer the questions, or there could be we've seen them where they have huge lists of catalogs broken down by assistive technology or disability area. And if you know what you want, you can go in, and maybe there's even a few choices for, say, a video magnifier or something like that. Just depends on the category. But so this can be handy, but sometimes they're so robust that it can be overwhelming for somebody unless they truly know from already using this equipment what their needs are. They can just feel must be too much information. So even with these wizards or these portals, they're good tools, but it's usually there's a human factor that somebody needs to help somebody step through those questions and answers.
All right.
Great question.
Are there any more questions? That was a really good question.
Even if you have an example of someone at your organization, or you're puzzled as to what to do.
Yeah, feel
And
free to share any
Our
scenarios. that
contact
you've had.
information, I'm sorry, Jeff.
No,
Our
go-
contact information is on this last slide. Contact and follow us. Different ways to stay in touch. The webinar will be available through our YouTube site. And you can email either one of us, and we can send you the information on this presentation. It's basically our first and last name at iYellowgroup.com. Jeff.Ermold, ERMOLD at iYellowgroup.com, and Harris.Rosenzweig, ROSENSWEIG at iYellowgroup.com.
Yeah, and we'll be doing these pretty much on a monthly basis. We have a number of other ones that will, if you're on our list, we also will be presenting at the CSUN conference. So if there are any of you in the assistive technology field that are going to CSUN in California in March, we're doing 3 presentations. So please look us up there, and maybe we can even meet and greet in person. So feel free to reach out if you're going to CSUN and you'd like to meet. We would love to do that.
And I just brought up all of our workshops that we do, 1 and 2 day workshops on different types of accessibility topics for developers and for people working on documents. And we do these in person and remotely.
Okay, well, if there's anything we can do for you or your organization about anything we talked about today, feel free to reach out to Harris or Jeff. We have a lot of experience in this area, and what we really and truly enjoy the most is helping. So whatever we can do to assist in that, we're more than happy to do that. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, whether it's offline or now. But yeah, I think we can probably we're at 1:53. And I don't think we have any more questions. So I think we can probably wrap it up. So thank you everyone very much for attending, for joining, and
Thank you.
hope you can join us for the next one.
Thanks again.
Oh,
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks.